the conspiracy to control Europe. And these remain, 150 years later, important proof texts for conspiracy theorists to say, aha, look, Benjamin Disraeli said it. And there are others like this. There was a case of a book that came out in the 1960s by Carol Quigley, a well-known professor at Georgetown, in fact, I think a professor of Bill Clinton's. Important book, Hope and Faith, I believe it's called. Big book, 1,200 pages. And in there, there's a passage or two in which he talks about there being a conspiracy at the Council of Foreign Relations, and he rather approves of it, and he was part of it, and he talks about it like that. And so these curious statements once in a while by people who should know, who claim to know, that there is in fact a conspiracy. And this heartens very much those who believe that there is in fact.
Disraeli was Jewish, but he did something about that.
No, he was converted as a child by his father, so he was always a Christian in his adult life.
Did he ever acknowledge that? I mean, was there anything around that, the Jewish part, that became an issue back in those days?
Well, not really. I mean, he was proud of being of Jewish origins, and he thought Jews were great people, but he also thought that, he also proclaimed that there was a Jewish and sometimes a secret society conspiracy. Very playful, I think, not very responsible, but having fun, and people seized on it as a very serious statement.
When did the issue over the Jewish conspiracy change from being the way it was in the beginning about the origins, the death of Christ and all that? When did it move into another realm where it was just a hatred of the people?
When did it move into another realm?
Now, what year was it, like, for instance, it became like Hitler, I wanted to exterminate Jews? It had nothing to do with Christ. It had something to do with the way he felt about the people.
Well, anti-Semitism in the course of the 19th century became an ism of its own, really from about 1870 on. There's a whole literature now defunct and forgotten, but in researching this book, I came across all these books that it was interesting to see that the library hadn't had a use of it, or it hadn't been taken out of the library for some 40 or 50 or 80 years, 100 years even. These are books that are forgotten, but at the time were important sources of pseudo-knowledge about Jews, that there is a concerted effort among Jews to take over Europe. Now, this was the time that Jews were emancipated, were leaving the ghettos and joining the mainstream of European life, and were quite successful. And so people who hitherto had been seen as remote, alien, dressing a different way, speaking a different language, Yiddish, following their own customs, now we're integrated, and we're successful in business, we're successful in journalism, the arts, and this movement out of the ghetto and into mainstream life was feared by some who interpreted it as part of a conspiracy to dominate. And the literature developed so that by the 19-teens, when, for example, Adolf Hitler encountered this literature, it was a full-blown body of ideas, which he absorbed, and many others as well. Quite respectable. Significant figures in the political world, the religious world, intellectual world, espouse these ideas. And it reached its culmination with Hitler. He took it in ways that hadn't been taken before. He made it unapologetic, he made it murderous in a way that had never been before. But it built on an ideology that had been around for some decades.
What's it like in the world now for Jews? Attitudes, anti-Semitism?
Well, more broadly, let me say that I think that conspiracy theories, while they peaked in the 1940s, have really declined since then. And they've moved to the margin, or two margins. The margin politically, and that you do not find in the Western world responsible figures espousing conspiracy theories. And if they do, they get marginalized. Ross Perot would be a good example. He lost a lot of standing when he started talking about conspiracy. Pat Robertson would be another. You can't get very far with this. It flourishes at the extremes. It is still dangerous at the extremes, but it's not operational. You don't have decisions made by the US or European governments along conspiracist lines. But the theories also moved to the margins geographically. They left the West. They went to places like India and Iran and Haiti and the Philippines, where they are indeed very important. And indeed, this is how I started my study of it, because they're so important in the Middle East today. So the general scene is, I think, a good one. The conclusion I draw is that we have learned something. We paid an enormous price for these conspiracy theories, but we in the West are no longer so prey to them, and with luck, it won't be too long until peoples in other parts of the world will also graduate out of this. So by and large, things are better, and certainly for Jews, to get back to your question, the situation is far better than it was in the early years of the century, first half of the century.
In the back, you have three appendices, Appendix C, 60 greatest conspiracies of all time, you list, and you can find it at www.conspire.com/conspire/symbol. I mean, you almost have to buy your book to find it. How did you find this internet site? Did you go in and look at it?
Yeah, I spent some hours, many hours, surfing through the internet to find these bizarre places.
60 greatest conspiracies of all time.
I think that one is somewhat tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, you say it is here.
There are people, such as the author of that site and the book related to it, Jonathan Vankin, who is both a conspiracy theorist and someone who has fun with them. And it becomes a little murky at times what he actually believes with them. And it becomes a little murky at times what he actually believes. It's that general area of intrigue and fascination, somewhat lighthearted, somewhat serious, not terribly consequential, except that it can get people to see the world in this conspiratorial fashion, and that can lead to evil consequences.
What are some of the less serious conspiracies that you enjoyed reading about that never went anywhere?
Well, I don't know if I actually enjoy any of them, but no question the most popular of all is the Kennedy assassination, which people can lose themselves in. There's so many arcane details. There's such a body of knowledge to learn about it. You can learn about ballistics. You need to learn about anatomy to understand what happened to the president and to Governor Connolly. You need to learn about geography of Dallas. You need to learn about the subsequent lives of the people who were connected to the Kennedy assassination. There's a theory that many of them died soon after it. There's such a body of evidence to learn, and people become specialists on this. It's very interesting. People who otherwise are not terribly intellectual become intellectuals, become specialists, scholars, as it were, or pseudo-scholars of this body of knowledge.
What about Area 51? Did you study that?
Area 51 is another good one. Not as popular as Kennedy, but the notion that an unidentified flying object landed in Roswell, New Mexico, just over 50 years ago. Very, very intriguing, and growing probably in its reach.
Do you ever listen to the all-night call-in show that talks about all this?
I'm afraid I don't.
Never heard it?
No. Only so much I can do. It's a huge...
Hundreds of radio stations carry the show across the country?
Yeah.
Never heard it?
No, I'm afraid I didn't. The UFOs isn't exactly central to my concern here. It's secondary. The main concern I have is with politics.
This is a small thing, but I noticed in the notes that you capitalize certain names, and then sometimes I think Gary Sick's name was both capitalized and in lowercase. What's that all about? I don't know if we can show the audience what you did, but what were you trying to do here?
Well, precisely because there is this pseudo-scholarship that so closely mimics conventional scholarship, I thought it important to indicate to the reader who the conspiracy theorist is and who the conventional analyst is. And I did it by putting the conspiracy theorists into small capitals. It sometimes is, as you say, a fairly subtle distinction in that some authors will appear at times in capitals and other times in normal letters. But most of the time it's pretty clear. But you'll find that some of the books are published by reputable publishers, have all the apparatus of a scholarly book, with footnotes and appendices and bibliographies and all the rest, and yet are stark raving mad.
Up here you have a dedication. This is to Sarah Pipes, an avid reader. Who's Sarah Pipes?
She's my elder daughter. She's 12 years old, and she is indeed an avid reader, and I thought this was a nice way to note that publicly.
How much does she read?
Oh, she reads everything she gets her hand on.
And what did she think when she saw her father dedicate a book to her?
Well, we had actually a little conspiracy to keep this from her. Everyone knew it but her, and then finally the book came a couple of weeks ago, and I had the pleasure of giving it to her. Everyone else knew that it was dedicated to her, and she didn't, and I think she was delighted by it.
Did she find it on her own?
Yes, she did. Yes, I just gave her the book, and she found it on her own. And now it sits on her shelves in among all the books that you'd expect a 12-year-old to have. And here is this rather serious-looking paperback, quite a bit larger and quite different in appearance from all her other books.
What's next for you?
I'm doing a book now on what I'm calling Muslim America. I'm co-authoring it with someone else, and we're looking at Islam in the United States, both Nation of Islam, black converts, and immigrants, and trying to assess this phenomenon, its importance, its implications. It's a growing and I think significant new phenomenon in the United States. It raises all sorts of issues that haven't existed before.
And in history, where are we? I asked you about the Jewish situation, but where are we in history about conspiracism or conspiracies compared to what you know, all the years that you studied it?
I think things are basically going well, in that the terrible consequences of this phenomenon are declining. People are becoming slowly over time aware that this notion that there's an enemy out there, that things are not what they seem to be, is very harmful. And people are somewhat more commonsensical than they used to be. And common sense is the key. The only way to battle this illusion is through common sense.
Now, this cover, did you have anything to do with this?
No, I didn't. I'm rather pleased with it, though.
Do you have any idea what that picture is?
I believe it's to be some men, murky, shadowy, having illicit relations with each other. In short, conspiring.
Was this posed for this cover?
These are dolls, I was told. That there's an artist in New York who has dolls that can be used for all different sorts of purposes.
Our guest has been Daniel Pipes, and the book is called Conspiracy: How the Paranoid Style Flourishes and Where It Comes From. Thank you very much.
Thank you.